This week on Eye for Iran, the race to be Iran's next president is down to two. Now there's runoff elections after record low voter turnout. And the Arab League has taken Hezbollah off its terror list. Why now, and what that means for Iran, Israel, and Lebanon. I'm Negar Mojtahedi, and this is Eye for Iran. Joining us now to talk more about the Arab League's decision to remove Hezbollah from its terror list is Dr. Walid Phares. He's an American academic. He's a foreign policy expert who has advised U.S. presidential candidates. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Phares.
Thank you for having me today for this important subject.
It's a pleasure. So, Dr. Phares, the Arab League is made up predominantly of Sunni countries. Hezbollah, of course, is a Shiite proxy group of the Islamic Republic of Iran. In 2016, the Arab League themselves enlisted Hezbollah as a terror entity. So why the shift, and why now at a time where Israel and Hezbollah are potentially on the brink of war?
Oh, absolutely. So many factors. This is really one of the most complicated matters, but let's try to simplify it for your audience. At this point in time, being Shia and Sunni doesn't work like we used to think, automatically sectarian. Which axis are you following? If you are following the Islamic Republic network, should it be in Iraq, mostly Shia militias, or in Syria, or in Lebanon? But Hamas is Sunni. Let's begin there. Let's clarify to our audience that if there's also the power and money factors that count very much.
They go over the sectarianism.
Yes, the sectarianism is still around, but you can bypass it at this point in time, which means to us that the Islamic Republic can recruit Sunni jihadists. They have to be jihadists. Can recruit them. They coordinate with the Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood are the top Sunnis. So it's not as sectarian as we thought. On the popular level, yes, many dislike each other. But now we're talking about ideological and strategic. So that's number one. Number two, very important. Many things have happened between 2016 and now. It's not that everything was horizontal. Well, in 2016, the Arab coalition, meaning in a group of allies with Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, UAE, Egypt, Jordan to a certain point, and other candidates later, they saw that U.S. policy is changing. They predicted and projected that there will be a Trump administration. They have been in touch with them before and with the U.S. Congress. So they projected that eventually there will be a U.S.-led campaign and action against the regime in Iran. Based on this, they had the guts, basically, to put Hezbollah on terror list.
So are they trying to help Iran?
No, they are trying to position themselves in a way that as long as there is a Biden-Obama, Trump back and forth, they don't know who's going to win. Let's bring it to its reality. So at the same time, Iran's republic, Islamic Republic, is putting so much pressure on the Iran lobby in this country to put pressure on the Arab coalition. So do not be shocked or surprised if this last move by the Arab League, the same partners in the Abraham Accord and the same partners in the general alliance that was between 2017 and 2020, they're saying, look, we can't be more monarchist than the monarch. We're not going to, if the United States is not fighting the regime, if the United States is not even daring taking action against Hezbollah and the Houthis, we have our Navy sitting in the Red Sea and not really responding to what the Houthis are doing. We're not going to be engaged in a confrontation. Even Israel, with all its influence within the United States, is barely getting a support from this administration. Now, do I support this idea or not? I would not advise that the Arab League or the Arab coalition would do so, but these are the realities. But what that means also, if the US will change its policy again in January and February, if we have a political change here, the Arab League will relist it and the US will relist the Houthis. It's all about the weakness that Washington is showing in international relations.
That's interesting. So Washington is having a really big impact on this. And can you explain more? I found that was really interesting what you were talking about, the Iran influence network in Washington. So are you saying that they suggested that the Arab League remove Hezbollah from the terror list?
That's a little piece, Negar. I mean, I have been focusing so much on the Iran lobby. We call it the Iran lobby. I would add it's the Iran deal lobby, meaning the guys who have the money. Remember, when we've sent billions of dollars to the regime over many, many years under the Obama administration and then under the Biden administration, remember that in between we suspended the Iran deal in Washington. What has happened is that the regime in Tehran has funded its influence networks all over the place. In Western Europe, very clear there, in European Parliament, European Commission, but also within the United States. Last summer actually, there was a long report by Semaphore showing examples of the influence that the regime has. It's not just friendly influence. It's basically being able to penetrate our bureaucracy. It's basically being able to use the influence power of these large companies that have been promised by Tehran, I mean the Islamic Khomeinist Tehran, to get goodies.
Which companies? Which type of companies are you speaking of?
Well, what I will only talk about the companies who have already had contracts, and this is Googleable. When we think of General Electric, of Boeing, of multitude of multinational corporations, I don't blame them. They are capitalists, so they do whatever they want, whatever they can engage. But they have been used by the Iran lobby to pressure the administration, this administration basically, to put pressure on the Arabs, and guess on who? On Israel. Why is the Biden administration so set on, we need a ceasefire in Gaza, we need to stop Israeli action in Lebanon, we need not to unnerve the Houthis? I mean, kids at school would understand that there is a central force from the United States, from the West, that is being influenced by the Iran deal. Why? Because of the weight of the billions of dollars that many circles are profiting from. So for money, you would change foreign policy, and that's the problem. We're not anymore in the old bipartisan agreements on matters. Democrats and Republicans should never be influenced by a third outside force. They are speaking about Ukraine and Russia, but they don't see what the Khomeinist Republic is doing here. And that is a problem. That's why many Arab officials will ask me, and I will tell them, they will say, why wouldn't the U.S. respond to Hezbollah, to Hamas, to everything else? And I'll tell them, because we have an imbalance of power within the United States that we need to correct. We need to have a clear strategic national security perspective, not just the influence of a regime which, by the way, is planning on defeating us. No matter what. I mean, this is kind of there is an example today in the media. Russia will be sending missiles to the Houthis in Yemen. I mean, what kind of reality is this? We are sending billions of dollars to the regime in Tehran. Regime in Tehran is buying missiles. This is their money now. They're buying missiles from Russia and then deploying it in Yemen. And in Yemen, the Houthis are targeting us. I have never seen a foreign policy like this. Completely disastrous.
And so are you saying then that Iran is outsmarting the West and compromising our national security?
For years and years, Negar. I mean, I wrote 2 books, especially the last one, the current one, to explain to the readers, to the American public, that the influence of this regime and their strategies have been, I mean, one has to, accept reality. Of course, they are our hostile enemies, but they outsmarted us. And they did use what is very sensitive in the West, which is companies and money and capitalism. Look at our schools. Since when we have had jihadi demonstrations across the nation? Because our classroom has been funded by Middle Eastern studies, themselves funded by either the Muslim Brotherhood or the Khomeinist regime. The American public is up for a large shock when they realize what is really behind this war against the United States.
Are they asleep?
I think part of them are asleep, part of them are waking up right now, because unfortunately in these kind of conflicts, we wake up a little bit late. Look what happened to us on 9/11.
Yes.
And I was a late member of the 9/11 Commission that discussed it. And the commissioners, both Democrats and Republicans, said, we didn't know that they were jihadists. We didn't know that they were planning against us. And now, unfortunately, some in Congress starts to realize this. Many in the public have realized since the October massacre in Israel, and of course, since what we have seen here on our streets, on our campuses.
Yes, definitely. I mean, we even saw the supreme leader of Iran saying that, that the resistance is strong. There's more Hezbollah in the West than there is in Lebanon right now. So it really makes you stop and think. And why is it that people don't understand this? Because
it has been blocked by a very sophisticated campaign that goes back almost to the mid 1990s. When I immigrated in the early 1990s, I mean, I saw our educational system changing. Funding was coming from petrodollar sources in the Gulf, and of course, later on from Ba'athist sources. But the most important one recently, over the past 10, 14 years, came from the Islamic Republic capacities. And who is fueling it? How can, let's say, the Iran regime be able to be influenced in academia, to be able to be able to act in the media? I mean, the media has been responsible for a lot of this because of the flow of money that reached the Islamic Republic. It's very simple. We send the money, they use it against us. It's like in science fiction movies. They are using our systems against us. And you need a Congress that will stand up, bipartisan, and start, first of all, alerting and mobilizing the American public, and then take measures. This is very dangerous to our national security, unfortunately.
And as someone who has advised U.S. presidential candidates, are you starting to see sort of this wake-up call? Are you starting to see anybody in Congress or anybody in American politics who's waking up to this and standing up for this?
Actually, the good news is yes. But as I said, as for Pearl Harbor or 9/11, we get a hit, a massive hit, then the waves of that hit will reach many in the nation, right? With the help of expertise, etc., and they start to react. So we have been paying a price. We will continue to pay a price. But yes, many members in Congress now are very alert to the matter. Think tanks are going in that direction. But as important is the fact that communities, Middle East American communities, are waking up. And when those starts to wake up, I'm talking about Iranian Americans, Lebanese Americans, Iraqi Americans, Kurds, even in Sudan and in Yemen, American citizens are now petitioning Congress because they know that in election years it's difficult to deal with the administration. So we can see a new cooperation between Middle East American communities and Congress will be the source that would start changing public opinion in the right direction.
So in making this decision, is the Arab League essentially telling Israel, we don't support you, we are symbolically supporting Hezbollah?
Depends on who in the Arab League. Those who were forming the Abraham Accord and the Arab Coalition are telling the Israelis, look, guys, I mean, we cannot sustain this. If the U.S. administration is not even helping you, what do you want us to do? So that's one part. Another part of the Arab League, like the Syrian Assad regime or the Iraqis who are very close to the Iranian regime, or even the Lebanese government under the influence of Hezbollah, yeah, they're saying we are winning. That's what they're saying on social media. We are winning, and so you have to stop. All of this is designed for Israel to stop its campaign to end Hamas and contain Hezbollah. All that is coming from the fact that if Israel is able to terminate Hamas, that is not the issue for the anti-Israel, anti-American Arabs, meaning the Iranian regime allies and the Muslim Brotherhood. It's about who will replace Hamas. That's the vital point I'm driving into Congress and telling them it's not just about Hamas can come back as an underground, but if you replace Hamas with pro-peace, pro-Abraham Accord, coordinating new young Palestinian leadership who would work with the Israelis, that's the end of jihadism.
Who do you think will replace Hamas then in this scenario?
Anybody who will be replacing Hamas is not seen today. They're smart enough to stay in the underground. And what it has been the reason for why there was hope, it's because many of the countries that are now forming the Arab Coalition and the Abraham Accord, the most important, I'm going to name a few, the UAE, Bahrain, and Saudi, and even Egypt, those countries are in full-fledged confrontation with the jihadists. I mean, if Israel fails in Gaza, it's not just Israel that would fail. Israel can remain as a country. They are strong. Their government will remain. But it's the Arab regimes, Arab governments who will be the next target. So that's why I was a little bit surprised that they were rushing to declassify Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, because once you, like the Houthis, once you take them out of the list, it's going to take a long time and a big price to bring them back.
Yeah, I mean, why would Saudi Arabia then agree to do this?
Because Saudi Arabia, since about 2 years, has learned, and I'm going to give examples, that this administration is not going to support Saudi Arabia if Iran attacks it. Remember what happened when Ukraine war exploded. The Biden administration needed to get some of the countries to produce more oil. So the president went to Saudi Arabia and told them, I want you to produce more at this specific price. And then the answer of the Saudis was, would you support us if the Iran regime would attack us? They said, no, I'll bring you to the table for the Arab-Iranian or Iran deal. So the Saudis understood that they're going to have to deal with 3 years at the time where the U.S. is not going to support them. At the same time, the Biden administration was pressuring the Saudis to withdraw from Yemen, was pressuring the Saudis and the UAE to stop fighting the Houthis. Guess what? They stopped. Who is now containing the Houthis? We are. If there is a confrontation, we will be paying the price. So it was a whole messy foreign policy, unfortunately, and we cannot wait as Americans for it to change.
And do you think Israel's going to care in terms of this removal? Is it actually going to have an impact on their policies?
I don't think so. I think this government, and despite all what we see on TV, etc., which has a multi-party, support to the goals, most Israelis support the goal of dismantling Hamas and replacing it with an Abraham Accord-like local government, not even the PLO, some new forms. Most Israelis want the threat of Hezbollah in the north to be pushed away or be eliminated. These are national security consensus within Israel. And on top of that, even the allies of Israel here in the United States, and they are the majority of Americans, a full majority in Congress. You have Democrats like Senator Fetterman, who are more pro-Israel than many Republicans in this case. So I am not concerned that the majority of Americans will stand by Israel and mostly will stand against the regime and Hezbollah. The Israeli government knows that, first of all, they need to end the presence of Hamas in Gaza. So Rafah, beyond Rafah, that has to end. Of course, they're taking all the precautions because there are so many civilians. And then the Israelis are going to look at Hezbollah and then send that warning. Either you go back 20 kilometers inside Lebanon, or we have no other choice. But guess what? Let me tell your audience that Hezbollah is not in the best condition inside Lebanon. 70% of the Lebanese, let me name them, the Druze, most of the Sunni, and most of the Christians, they are against Hezbollah. They have demonstrated for years and years. Many of their leaders have been assassinated by Hezbollah. We tend to forget that.
So I have to ask you, how are the regular, everyday Lebanese people reacting to this then, who are being held hostage by Hezbollah in Lebanon?
They are actually, Negar, but 30% of the Lebanese will profit from Hezbollah, mostly in the Shia areas, or are intimidated by Hezbollah. They support them. But 70% or more or less who are Druze fought Hezbollah in 2008. Everybody forget that the Druze resisted Hezbollah. The Christians, every 2 months, there is a clash between them in Mount Lebanon and Beirut and Hezbollah. The Sunnis have seen Hezbollah not just murdering their prime minister, Hariri, but also being with the Assad regime to massacre 400,000 Syrians. So there is a majority in Lebanon which is not armed, unfortunately for them, and which is waiting for a change of balance of power. Those people will rise. If there is an international action, I would have preferred that it would have been a US-led coalition to weaken Hezbollah. Now there is only Israel. So if Israel and Hezbollah go into a confrontation, Hezbollah will fear that 70% of Lebanon will rise against them.
And do you think that's going to happen, or do you think Israel is going to be on its own?
There are two decision makers now that we are in our elections, right, before we get a clarity on it. So you have Israel on the one hand to decide what to do and what not to do, and you have the Islamic regime in Iran. So it's like a game, a chess game between those two. Everybody else is either closer to Israel or closer to the Islamic regime, and they are measuring each other. The Iranian regime is looking so much into precision as to what's happening in Washington. Who will be the next administration? If it's a Trump administration, they want to wrap up everything in the region, and then maybe they will start, taking action against the American interests in the region or against the opposition, such as Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq. If they feel that the pro-Iran deal will win, should they be the Biden administration or a alternative Obama-backed administration, these are American politics. But the analysis is done in Tehran. If they feel that the future is better for them, they will wait. And they will say, they will sue for peace. They will say, fine, we'll have a ceasefire. But if they feel that a stronger government is coming to Washington next January, they may take dramatic positions. They may instruct Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and others to use much more effective weapons.
Wow. So do you think with a Trump presidency, that we would potentially see a full-out war then, if they feel threatened? Or would that actually bring peace and stability in the Middle East? What is your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a great question. The answer is very difficult because the Khomeinist mind is very complex. They will calculate very well. Plus, there is another problem for the Iran regime, the Iranian people. This was not a factor in the past. The Iranian people, the role of women, the role of civil society, of youth is something that the regime is afraid of. Actually, in my many interviews and in my articles, I have argued that one of the reasons why Tehran's Khomeinists ordered Hamas, it's not like they suggested, ordered Hamas to do October 7, is because, obviously we know it's because of the Israeli-Saudi potential agreement. But it's to drive attention away from the Massa revolution. It's to drive attention away from what was happening inside Iran, which was very dangerous to the regime. And now nobody talks about the executions happening within the Islamic Republic. They are crushing everybody because they have the momentum. So welcome to a war between Israel and Hezbollah, a war with the Houthis, a war, because that would save the regime.
And distract everything from them.
If a U.S. change of foreign policy will come, they may take dramatic decisions. And let me share something with your public for the first time. I would be concerned if the Khomeinists calculate that now the U.S. would lead something against them, they will show us what they have not shown us, a nuclear weapon.
Wow. And how much of a potential do you think that is for that to happen?
I have argued and I have briefed Congress that, ladies and gentlemen, the weapon may already exist. The rest, they are extracting money from you. Oh, we are at 60% of uranium and 80% and down. Yeah, they're doing the hostage thing. They're doing the Iran nuke challenge. To buy a tactical nuke from Central Asia or from Asia is not a big deal. And with all the money we're sending, the regime doesn't need a thermonuclear weapon because you cannot use it in the Middle East. Everybody will be hit with it. All they need is a tactical nuke. And a tactical nuke in the Middle East, should it be against the Arab coalition or Israel or others, is a real threat against us at the same time, our forces. So I really communicated to Congress that you have to be very careful of the calculation of the Khomeinists. They could go suicidal if they feel that the regime is going to go down.
So you feel that the Iranian regime will basically do anything to stay in power?
For the last 8 years, I can say it now, I have briefed and lectured to the most important national security agencies. I don't want to name them, obviously. And I still have my slides. And I told them the red line where you can calculate Iran regime suicidal moments or zero moment is if the regime is going to go down, including by a revolution. If the revolution is very successful against the regime, and it happened almost in June of 2009 with the Green Revolution, where the kids of the Sepa Pasdaran, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, were just asking the other youth, what do you think our parents should do? And President Obama at the time said, no, I'm not going to intervene. I'm not going to be seen as meddling. He saved the regime because the regime could have gone in a different direction. Same thing happened recently. The Biden administration did not support the revolution. If they would have supported them, even after the Ukraine war, we would have a different government in Iran today.
Why don't they? That's the one question the Iranian diaspora is always asking. Why? Why aren't people supporting the Iranian people rising up against their government or their regime?
The people, Negar, the people, meaning American citizens in general, or French and others, you see in all the events that the Iranian diaspora organize, they have so much support, even lawmakers. But those who have power, meaning the bureaucracies within the United States and within Western Europe, it's very shameful to say it, they are backed by lobbies. They are influenced by lobbies who are actually making money. And this crazy idea of sending $150 billion to a regime which is massacring its own population, which is using part of the money to come back and fund consultings and fund academia. It's like a vicious circle. Imagine if during World War II, we would be sending money to the Nazi regime just to isolate them, saying, oh, well, if you send them money, they're not going to pull anything. That's how we are living an experience today. those who are advising that we need to send them money, which is the money of the Iranian people, by the way, not the regime, are saying, well, throw them some meat. They will not attack us. Well, we are sending the money, they are buying the weapons, and they are attacking us. And the reason is that those who are what I call the brokers, those who are actually part of these transactions. I mean, in every financial transaction in the world, there is always a 10% for those who are fixing those transactions. What is 10% of $150 billion? $15 billion. You could buy anything you want on planet Earth.
Yeah.
So that's why we need a massive change that the next Congress, bipartisan could take, because otherwise we are the hostages of this policy.
My next question is, it's a pretty big question. What is the end game here? Not just for Iran, for Israel, Lebanon, and the West?
The Iranian leadership, there are two threats against the population of the Middle East and the West. One threat is the Islamic Republic leadership, which is very rich, by the way, who are very rich. And then the jihadist, Salafi, Ikhwan, Muslim Brotherhood. Some of them have been hosted by Qatar. These are the two problems. If those two problems are resolved, meaning a regime change in Iran, and an ideological defeat of the Sunni side, not the Sunni themselves, but the Salafi, Ikhwani, the Middle East will immediately seek for peace and development. It will stun everybody. That's why I had a hope in 2017 when all these moderates in the Arab world came to Riyadh, and President Trump addressed them at the time. And there was a formation of this Arab coalition. And they were completely convinced, especially the strong leaders such as Mohammed bin Salman, who's driving one of the most powerful reform movement in Saudi Arabia. And of course, the UAE and others. And Egypt had played a tremendous role in fighting the jihadists in Sinai. Had there been a chance for them to win, plus the peoples of the Middle East, my dream coalition that I see would be the United States in a different policy, the Arab coalition, the Iranian opposition, and civil societies in the region. This is the coalition that would free the Middle East from the jihadists, and then, of course, bring peace and human rights to become the reality of the region.
Well, we'll leave it there on a positive note. Thank you so much, Dr. Walid Phares, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Joining us now to talk more about the runoff elections is Roya Boroumand from the Boroumand Foundation for Human Rights. Thank you so much for joining us, Roya.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Roya, so this is one of the lowest voter turnouts we've seen since the inception of the Islamic Republic of Iran, the second runoff election. What does this indicate to you? Is this a crisis in confidence for the Iranian regime?
Well, it's a vote of distrust. I think, of course, we don't know how many have participated because the numbers are not accurate, but it is a low turnout because people have lost hope in change, and they are angry. They have lost hope because they have gone to the polls multiple times, listened to promises, believed promises, and they haven't seen significant change or meaningful changes, meaningful reforms, and they see that this is not about who is running or who has the power, because Khamenei has the power, the spiritual leader has the power, and he is unelected, and his predecessor didn't put his mandate to vote. So, and they are running the country, and the president is irrelevant because there are structural obstacles that the founders of the Islamic Republic, including the current ones, have put in place to prevent fundamental changes in the undemocratic and arbitrary laws, including the Constitution of Iran. And that's how you do meaningful change. You change undemocratic laws. And these structural obstacles are in place to prevent that. So people have understood, and they are angry because they haven't forgotten that in 2022, 2020, 2019, 2017, and 18, they came to the streets peacefully to protest, and they were shot in the back, they were shot in the head, they were shot in the chest, so shot with the deliberate intention to kill. And there has been mass arrests and torture, sexual violence, and it's not over. People are harassed permanently, and people who are arrested and even imprisoned, they become suspects for life. And so they haven't forgotten that, and they haven't forgiven the state for having such a brutal response.
So this goes prior to this so-called Massa revolution and the Women Life Freedom movement, is what you're saying then?
Yes, I mean, already in 2017, the protesters were not playing the game of the ruling elite and the factions. And the faction that is called reformist actually dismissed the importance of the protests, even though they were in many, many provinces. And then in 2019, they were very clearly chanting slogans against the clerics, against all factions. So, the protests were publicly anti-Islamic Republic.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I have a lot of, non-Iranians who ask me, well, then if the regime is so hated, if nobody's going out to vote, if they distrust the regime so much, why has there not been any change?
How would they do that? Because if they can't they can't form parties if they don't believe in the laws of the Islamic Republic. They can't. And so they can't run for election. They don't have access to the mass media. And they are not able to publish and disseminate their views. And even if they were allowed to run and they were elected, any laws that is passed by the parliament can be vetoed by an unelected Guardian Council. So there is no way practically that Iranians can legally change the Islamic Republic. And when they come to the streets, because that's the only place that is left for them to scream their anger or to their grievances or have demands, they are shot. So, how Westerners think that Iranians can change the Islamic Republic?
Exactly. And is it a lack of support from the West? I mean, with the death of Massa Amini, we saw so many French politicians cutting their hair in symbolism. Your sister met with Emmanuel Macron. What, can the West do anything then to help Iran?
Yes, of course. I mean, this war is in part physical, and Iranians basically fight in the trenches, but it's a major part of it is psychological. And in this psychological warfare, they need all the support they can get. And not only that, but there has to be also clear condemnation and clear action against those who perpetrate grave human rights violations against them. So this psychological warfare is very important, and that's why, and the circulation of information is very important, and that's why the regime blocks WhatsApp, Signal, I mean, everything. They just try to prevent the outside world from seeing what's happening inside world. And in the past couple of years, they've also blocked access to the judiciary website and to all the website that, are relevant to the law, even the parliament, because they don't want you to use the wrong they do against them, right? So the Westerners can play a great role. They can support civil society. They can support, and they have to show it. It's not just meeting behind closed doors, or it has to be obvious that people who are fighting for their rights have legitimacy, even if they are not in any faction, even if they don't have arms, because violence sometimes brings legitimacy. That's how Khomeini had legitimacy. But and even if they have to leave the country, they have to make sure that activists who are pushed to leave the country don't lose their relevance.
And when it comes to, again, in the West, especially in the Western media, we frame things as, this ultra-conservative candidate, this hardliner candidate, and this moderate or pro-reform. What does that even mean in the context of the Islamic Republic?
Well, in the context of the Islamic Republic, reform is a very different idea. I mean, these factions have a lot in common. And what they have in common is that they have a past, they have contributed to what we have, they have founded, they have put the repressive apparatus they have created the repressive apparatus and the security apparatus and the Revolutionary Guards. So they have tried to turn Iran into a totalitarian state, which, is what it is like a wannabe maybe totalitarian state, but it is. The idea was that. So this is their past. So none of them has any interest in seeing the Islamic Republic go. Because if that is the case, they have to be, they will be held accountable, or they will have no chance of running again because no one, they will have a lot of competition that will be more attractive. So, but then in those factions, there are some that are for more freedom of expression, not a lot of freedom of expression, but more freedom of expression, less restrictions on the streets. Sometimes, even they have visits of prisons, and they publish guidelines for prison personnel not to mistreat prisoners. But at the end of the day, we are always at the same place, because they also are not calling for the reform that would allow parties and groups that don't believe in the Islamic Republic to come into the political scene. They have never called for that, and some of them think that the spiritual leader should not, that position should be eliminated. But that doesn't change the fact that the laws are undemocratic, and that the Council of Guardians is vetoing every reform, that even if it passes through the parliament. So yes, they may have differences in the way they handle the people.
And this discriminatory framework is still always going to be in place. And when it comes to those small differences that you speak of, like, for example, the potential relaxation of some hijab laws, for instance, in a way, would that not help to solidify the power of the Islamic Republic and actually hurt the opposition in the West, because it creates this illusion of freedom?
Well, first, they can't really change those laws. The Council of Guardians, and I'm not even sure that they want, but they won't be able to do that. Pezeshkian, there are videos of him circulating that in the early days of the revolution, where he says that, we made sure that even though there was no law for mandatory hijab in the early days, we made access to the hospital in Tabriz access impossible for women who were not dressed properly and didn't have the coverage and the uniform. So I don't think that anyone really wants to see Iranians dressed the way they want. But I don't think that loosening the laws is strengthening the regime, but it is weakening the resolve of countries who believe in universal rights, and it makes them believe that, maybe there is a chance to talk, and they smile and they have conversations and they engage. Even Raisi engaged a lot at the UN, right? So they engage, and so they say, okay, because, helping the society, helping Iranians is difficult, right? And there is no perspective. The Islamic Republic has invested in Latin America looking at 40 years ahead, in Africa but democracies look short term, right? And it's all very complicated and difficult. But talking to the regime is not complicated because that's what they know how to do. And so I think that's what it does. And it never lasts because, and especially now that women are rebellious and continue to go out without their veil, if they loosen a little bit, they will have way more people out there. And, what happens is that all these women not veiled, all these people who are in their appearance saying that they don't want the Islamic Republic is making them look weak, right? So that's the dilemma here.
And does this whole low voter turnout then make Iran look very weak and illegitimate? Not only to the eyes of the world, but to Iran itself. It must be very embarrassing, I would think, for the supreme leader.
Low turnout means that people don't believe in the legitimacy of the elections, and that is a good analysis because people are much more informed now than they used to be 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Information circulates more, but also they understand that they are spectators in a soccer game between factions, right? And that they are never allowed to play and they will never be allowed to play. So, low turnout means that this regime doesn't have legitimacy. The fewer people go to the polls, the less legitimacy the regime has.
That's a very interesting analogy. And when it came to the Women, Life, Freedom movement, it did a lot to really put the spotlight on gender apartheid in Iran. Depending on who becomes the president, do you see, would that even make a difference? If it's Jalali or Pezeshkian, is that going to change anything really, or it's all just the same?
No, because the laws are fundamentally discriminatory and treat women as second-class citizens in all aspects, almost all aspects of their lives, including political participation, since women can't run for president. And so none of these, even if there were attempts to change these laws, they will be blocked by the Council of Guardians, which is composed by a number of very traditional men who are not elected and who are not willing to let go of the control.
We've been seeing it in Europe, elections in tandem right now, and it appears that Europe is going more towards the right. And the right-wing European parties are known for being anti-Islamic. Then meanwhile, you have the Islamic Republic, which is trying to export its Islamist Islamic revolution around the world. I know you don't like to speculate, but do you foresee, what kind of relationship do you foresee between these potentially right-wing European countries and their anti-Islamist views, and then a country like Iran that, again, is trying to export its Islamist views to the world?
Well, look, any of these parties winning in democracies is bad news for everyone, right? Because yes, they are anti-Islamic, they are anti-everything. And so they don't believe as strongly in the democratic principles, and they will undermine the rule of law. So, they will weaken democracy. So how they will deal with the Islamic Republic, how they were funded by Putin, right, in France. So they don't have a problem with tyrants when they are elsewhere, right? And they are anti-Islamic because they have a large Muslim population, right? So it is an internal issue. But generally speaking, they will weaken Western democracies, and weakened Western democracies automatically strengthen autocracies and dictatorships and totalitarian states, because in those countries, people are persecuted and they look at Western democracies and they see that people are not persecuted, that they can speak freely, that their private lives are respected, and that they can participate in the political life and say anything without being put to prison and torture. So they want that. And the less democratic those states are, the less these people have to want, because there is nothing elsewhere. It's all, everywhere is chaos, everywhere is bad. So you have nowhere, to look at for improvement. So I think that automatically, no matter what they do with Iran, that automatically strengthen the Islamic Republic.
Well, on that negative note of chaos, we will wrap things up. Thank you so much. That's Roya Boroumand. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you for having me.
The Eye for Iran podcast series is created by Iran International, the go-to destination for expert Iranian news in both Farsi and English. For more, head to our dedicated English website, iranintl.com/en.